Mr. President of the European Parliament, Mr. President of the European Commission, dear colleagues, this was the first meeting of the European Council since I became its President that was not dominated by an immediate urgency. It was a normal meeting, and the decisions we took were of considerable significance, not least in terms of dealing with the ongoing economic situation and looking beyond the crisis at how we can improve Europe's long-term economic performance. We recently showed a strong political determination in safeguarding the stability of the euro. I was happy to note at this meeting a similar resolve to enhance our long-term economic strength through a new European strategy for jobs and growth, including the Europe 2020 strategy. Building on the work of the Commission and of the sectoral councils, we endorsed the 5 headline targets with which you are now familiar and which we consider to be crucial for increasing Europe's economic growth rate. Itself essential if we are to maintain our European way of life with an aging population and if we want to remain a world player. Now, I know that some in this House and elsewhere have expressed misgivings and asked whether the Europe 2020 strategy can produce better results than the previous Lisbon strategy, generally held to have been insufficient. My firm belief is that it can. We have deliberately chosen to focus on a smaller number of targets rather than the plethora of targets that got lost in the Lisbon strategy. They are vital targets and integrate the social, environmental and educational dimensions that your Parliament has rightly insisted on. We will focus relentlessly on those targets with ongoing work and annual reviews. There will be national breakdowns of targets and not just Europe-wide aggregates, thereby providing realistic yardsticks to measure national performances. Above all, I have sought to achieve a sense of ownership of the process by our member states so that they do not consider this to be something adopted in Brussels, which they subsequently ignore, but consider it to be an inherent part of their own economic strategy. I count on the European Parliament to keep up the pressure for implementing the EU 2020 strategy. It has to be a vital part of how we assess the state of our Union. I was pleased that when you, President, addressed the heads of state and of government at the start of the last week's meeting of the European Council, you draw attention to this Parliament's support for the Europe 2020 strategy. That was very welcome. At the same time, I know that there are some in this chamber and elsewhere who have expressed concerns about the method being used to implement the strategy. Is it, as some have claimed, too much of an intergovernmental working method? I would simply point out that improving Europe's economic performance requires the use of a range of instruments, some of them a European competence and others a national competence. At the European level, we can and do adopt common legislation for our common market on the regulation of financial services, on competition policy, on trade, on consumer protection and on other matters. We can also make use of the EU budget, in particular the structural funds and the research programmes. In all this, the role of the Commission is pivotal. But key aspects of our economic performance remain essentially a national competence, not least education. If we are to be successful we need to mobilise all levels of government in a common endeavour. According to the treaty, and I quote Article 121, Member States shall regard their economic policies as a matter of common concern and shall coordinate them within the Council. This coordination is to be based on European Council's conclusions and involves all the institutions with an input from both the Commission and the Parliament. And we are currently increasing the scope of this coordination, just as we are increasing the scope of what we do through EU legislation, such as on banking legislation. Both coordination of national policies and common action at EU level are required. The task of the European Council, bringing together as it does both the leaders of the national governments and the President of the Commission, is to determine the guidelines and political direction of both these elements. Those who are seeking to pit the Commission and Member States against each other do the Union a disservice. I might add that it is also somewhat facile to equate the European Council with simple intergovernmentalism. It is now an EU institution. It operates within the framework of the carefully balanced architecture of the Union as a whole, described in the treaties. It includes among its members the President of the Commission. It now has, as its own President, someone chosen to work in the interest of the Union as a whole and who is not simultaneously representing a national government. In any case, we should not assume that heads of national governments are not capable of perceiving the wider common interest or that they are unaware of the fact that their own national interest is indeed to have a well-functioning union. Coming back to our meeting of last week, the European Council also took a decision which, in my opinion, is of equal importance of the Europe 2020 strategy. This was the decision to establish a scorecard and a system of surveillance to better assess competitiveness, developments and imbalances, so that we can detect unsustainable or dangerous trends at an earlier stage. Such imbalances have not been focused on in the past, partly because they were not identified in the treaty as one of the Maastricht criteria. Yet they are of vital importance. Indeed, the current situation facing a number of our member states can be traced back to these imbalances. The euro was a victim of its own success. We forgot that the common currency needs convergence and reforms. Errors are made at all levels of governments over the last 10 years. Let's be honest, it is a collective responsibility.